Imagine walking into a really high-end art gallery.
Okay, picturing it.
You step off this busy, chaotic city street, you push through those heavy glass doors, and you enter this massive, stark white room.
Right, the classic pristine white cube space.
Exactly.
Uh,
But there are no paintings hanging on the walls. I mean, there are no marble sculptures resting on pedestals. The room is completely physically empty.
Wait, so there's literally nothing to look at?
Nothing. There's absolutely nothing to look at. And yet, the curator standing by the door tells you that you are currently standing right in the middle of a groundbreaking masterpiece.
Well, that would definitely throw me off.
Right. To experience it, you don't use your eyes. You don't, like, read a little placard on the wall. You just have to stand there, close your eyes, and listen.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, you listen to this low, rhythmic thrumming vibrating up through the floorboards, and it's mixing with, like, the hum of the air conditioning and the distant, muffled sirens from the street outside.
So the art isn't on a canvas at all.
No, the art is literally vibrating the bones inside your inner ear.
I mean, that scenario just completely shatters the fundamental contract we have with art, doesn't it?
It really does. It flips it completely upside down.
Because for centuries, our relationship with art has been incredibly polite. It's heavily structured and based almost entirely on visual distance.
You stand on one side of a velvet rope, and the masterpiece stays safely on the other.
Exactly. You are the viewing subject, and it is the viewed object. You can turn your head, look at the exit sign, and the art essentially it disappears from your consciousness.
You're totally in control of the experience.
Right, but the moment you step into the world of sound art, that illusion of control, that safe, comfortable distance is just completely ripped to shreds.
It is a total sensory ambush. You literally can't look away from sound.
You can't. And that ambush forces us to ask some really uncomfortable questions about what art actually is, and honestly, more importantly, how our bodies perceive reality.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. Because today, we are exploring a massive stack of media theory, art history, and philosophy, specifically focusing on how sound operates when we strip away the visual.
And we have some incredible source material to guide us through this.
We really do. We are pulling from Alan Lick's Sound Art Revisited, Seth Kim Cohen's In the Blink of an Ear, and Salome Vogelin's Listening to Noise and Silence.
Plus, we're looking at Lev Manovich's The Language of New Media, alongside some really vital historical frameworks from Douglas Kahn and David Tupe.
Yeah, so our goal today is to kind of cut through all the heavy academic jargon and figure out how shifting our focus from looking at art to listening to our environments can fundamentally change things, like how we interact with the physical world and, honestly, how we interact with each other.
To really grasp the magnitude of this shift, we have to recognize that this isn't just a niche art history lesson. It's a foundational questioning of human perception itself.
Because we are just so incredibly visually focused as a society, right?
Oh, absolutely. Western culture is deeply ocular-centric. We equate seeing with truth. I mean, think about our language. We say seeing is believing, or I see what you mean.
Right. We don't say, I hear what you mean. Well, sometimes we do, but usually it's I see.
Exactly. So when we elevate invisible acoustic waves to the level of high art, we are dismantling centuries of visual dominance. We're asking you to find meaning in something that is entirely ephemeral.
Something that literally disappears the exact millisecond it's created.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this right out of the gate. Because I know you, listening right now, might be hitting a mental roadblock. You might be wondering, wait, how is sound an art that is distinct from music?
That is the most common hurdle people face when approaching this topic.
Right, because if somebody sits on a stage and plays a cello, they're generating sound waves, and we universally agree that is art. So isn't all music just sound art? Like, what is the actual difference?
Well, before we can even understand how this medium changes our brains, we have to tackle the incredibly slippery task of defining what it actually is.
Which is not easy.
Not at all. In fact, looking at Alan Lick's framework in Sound Art Revisited, he essentially starts his book by just throwing his hands up. He calls sound art a classification for the unclassifiable.
It was hilarious for an academic to just admit right away, I wrote a book on this, but honestly, it's impossible to classify.
It is. But Lick's struggle to pin this down is incredibly revealing about how art institutions operate. Usually art history loves neat little boxes.
Yeah, movements are usually categorized by a specific time period or a specific geography.
Right, or a tight-knit group of rebellious artists writing a manifesto in a Parisian cafe. We have the French Impressionists in the 1870s, or the abstract expressionists in New York in the 1950s.
But sound art just entirely lacks that convenient origin story.
It does. The term sound art didn't even really exist, or certainly wasn't widely adopted by the mainstream art world when the first seminal works were being created back in the mid-20th century.
So it's a completely retroactive label. It feels like curators woke up one day in the late 1980s, looked around their galleries, and realized, wait a minute, all these visual artists, conceptual sculptors, and avant-garde composers have been doing something weird for decades.
Doing something that didn't fit into a traditional music hall?
Right. And definitely couldn't be framed on a wall. So they needed a bucket to put it all in, and they just slapped the label sound art on it.
And honestly, museums genuinely panic when trying to archive and display these works because this movement emerged organically out of the chaos of Dadaism, the anti-art sentiments of Fluxus in the 1960s, and the rise of conceptualism.
It totally defined the commodification of the gallery system. I mean, you can't easily sell a low-frequency hum to a billionaire art collector.
Exactly. How do you auction off an invisible vibration? So, to make sense of this wild frontier, Alan Licht divides sound art into two functional, overarching categories.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the first one?
The first is what he calls installed sound environments. These are works defined entirely by the physical and acoustic space they occupy, rather than by a musical timeline.
So they're exhibited just like visual art. You walk into a room, and the sound is permanently installed in that room.
Yes. And it fundamentally alters your perception of the architecture itself.
The room itself basically becomes the canvas.
That's a great way to put it.
And Licht's second category.
The second is sound sculptures. These are physical objects, actual visual artworks you can walk around and look at that have a deliberate sound-producing function.
Like what? What would be an example of that?
Well, it could be a kinetic metal sculpture that clanks and groans as its internal gears shift. Or maybe a massive, hollowed-out wooden structure built in a desert, specifically designed to catch and amplify the wind.
Oh, wow. So the physical form is completely dictated by the acoustic result it's trying to achieve.
Precisely.
So bringing it back to that friction between sound art and music, it really seems like it comes down to the relationship with time and authority.
Pardon me.
Well, if I go to a symphony hall to hear a Beethoven concerto, the composer and the conductor hold absolute authoritarian control over time. The piece takes exactly 45 minutes.
Right.
And every single person sitting in those plush velvet chairs is strapped into the exact same temporal roller coaster, experiencing the exact same progression of notes at the exact same predetermined moment. If you leave to use the restroom, you miss part of the art.
That is a perfect distinction. Music is a time-based medium that demands uniform, passive reception from a seated audience.
But sound art is different.
Very different. Sound art, particularly the installed environments Licht focuses on, democratizes the experience by making it spatial. In a sound installation, the listener dictates the time spent.
So I'm the one in control.
Yes. You can walk into a vibrating room, stay for 30 seconds because it makes you anxious, and just leave. Or you can sit on the floor and stay for 3 hours.
I could walk into the corner to hear how the acoustic resonance builds up against the drywall and then walk to the center of the room to hear the dead space.
Exactly. You are the one actively navigating the timeline. The art doesn't move past you, you move through the art.
That spatial awareness makes me think of the quote you highlighted from the conceptual artist Lawrence Weiner. It perfectly encapsulates why treating galleries as purely visual spaces is a complete myth.
Oh, Wiener's insight is brilliant here.
Yeah, he pointed out that when you stand in front of a famous painting, say the Mona Lisa at the Louvre, you do not experience it in a sensory vacuum. While your eyes are locked on the canvas, your ears are absorbing a chaotic symphony.
You hear tourists whispering in 6 different languages behind you.
Right. You hear the sharp clack of high heels on marble floors. You hear the low rumble of the climate control system keeping the room at a steady humidity. Weiner basically says everything is moving along at the same time.
When we look at visual art, we pretend our hearing just magically shuts off, but there is no single dominant sense. Sound art just actively embraces that simultaneous, messy reality.
It strips away the illusion of the isolated, untouchable masterpiece, like a traditional painter prays that you ignore the sound of the air conditioning.
While a sound artist might stick a microphone inside the air conditioning unit and make it the focal point of the entire room.
Yes, sound art acknowledges that the environment itself, the architecture, the ambient noise, the people in the room, is always actively participating in the work.
But, applying Licht's categories in the real world reveals a really tricky gray area.
Let's talk about that. Let's look at Annie Lockwood. She is an absolutely phenomenal composer and artist.
Truly groundbreaking work.
She created a piece called A Sound Map of the Danube. It's this massive audio installation where she spent years traveling down the Danube River, all the way from the Black Forest down to the Black Sea.
And she recorded everything, the surface water splashing against rocks.
Yeah, she even dropped specialized hydrophones underwater to record the aquatic insects and the shifting riverbed. It's incredible. She takes these recordings, sets them up in a gallery with a map, and explicitly calls this sound art.
But here is the catch.
Right. Lockwood also takes commissions to write musical pieces for traditional acoustic bands. And she has stated on the record that it wouldn't even cross her mind to call those band pieces sound art.
Which perfectly illustrates that the medium alone, just the sheer existence of sound waves, does not define the genre. Lockwood is working with sound in both instances.
But the labels change.
Because the context, the spatial relationship, and the intent of the listener drastically shift the categorization. The Danube map asks you to explore a geography through your ears at your own pace.
While the band commission asks you to sit and receive a structured temporal narrative.
Exactly.
Well, let me push back on this with a hypothetical because I really want to test the boundaries of Licht's definition here.
Go for it.
Let's say I rent out a stark, white-walled gallery space. I place a single, beautifully designed, high-end speaker on a pedestal right in the center of the room. I press play, and it loops Mozart's Requiem. Is that sound art? Or is it just music playing in a weird location? It sounds to me like the intent of the space is doing all the heavy lifting here, rather than the sound itself.
That specific friction is exactly what drove early practitioners of this medium absolutely crazy.
I can imagine.
In your hypothetical, if your artistic intent is to force the listener to examine how the stark acoustics of a modern gallery distort and echo the classical orchestration of Mozart, then you are arguably approaching sound art.
Because I'm using Mozart as a material to highlight the room itself.
Right. But if your intent is just to play a beautiful piece of music and you just happen to put the speaker in a gallery, then no, it's just music playing in a room.
That is such a fine line.
It is. And this definitional headache, this constant battle over what to call things, leads us perfectly to one of the absolute founding fathers of the medium. A man who, paradoxically, harbored a visceral hatred for the term sound art.
Max Neuhaus.
Rex Neuhaus. He had an almost allergic reaction to the label.
Why did he hate it so much?
He argued publicly that calling his spatial installations sound art was as intellectually lazy and ludicrous as looking at a monumental curving steel sculpture by Richard Serra and calling it steel art.
Wow.
To Neuhaus, sound was merely his raw material, just like steel or clay or oil paint. The material itself didn't define the conceptual weight of the work.
It's like picking up Moby Dick and categorizing it as ink art. You're focusing so hard on the physical substrate that you are entirely missing the architecture of what the creator actually built.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it, ink art. And Neuhaus's background is vital to understanding his philosophy here. He was originally a world-class percussionist.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He spent years on traditional stages, hitting physical objects to make sounds in a linear progression. But he grew incredibly frustrated with the limitations of the concert hall.
He felt trapped by the time constraints.
Completely. So he abandoned traditional musical performance entirely because he wanted to shift the paradigm from time to space. As we noted earlier, traditional composers locate their elements in time-like, a simple crash at the 2-minute mark.
But Neuhaus decided to locate his elements in physical space, like a low hum in the north stairwell and a high pitch in the south corridor.
Exactly the transition he made. He wasn't composing songs anymore. He was building architecture out of invisible frequencies.
And the theorist David Toop makes a vital observation about Neuhaus's physical methodology that I found so fascinating.
About how he hid the equipment.
Yes. Neuhaus almost always went to great, exhausting lengths to place his sound sources, the heavy speakers, the tangled electronics, the amplifiers, so they could not be seen by the public.
He hid the machinery behind vents, under grates, and beneath floorboards.
Right. He wanted his creations to exist on what Toop calls the threshold of perception. He wanted the sounds to feel like a natural, almost ghostly property of the space itself, rather than something being pumped in by a machine.
Which is such a fascinating psychological trick.
It really is. Because if you're a proud artist or an engineer who just built a complex audio system, the natural, ego-driven instinct is to show it off. You want people to see the massive subwoofers you brought in,
But Newhouse hides them entirely.
Right. Think about how our brains work. If I walk into a room and I see a speaker mounted on the wall, my brain instantly categorizes the experience. I think, a speaker. I'm listening to a broadcast. Someone is playing a tape. I focus on the object as the source.
By completely hiding the source, Newhouse strips away that easy categorization. He forces the listener to engage with the environment itself. You aren't listening to a speaker, you are listening to the room.
You've hit on the exact mechanism of his genius there. By removing the visual anchor of the speaker, your ear starts searching the room. It demands a highly active, individualized spatial navigation.
You find yourself tilting your head, walking slowly toward a corner, trying to physically locate the source of this invisible presence.
It turns the listener into an active explorer rather than a passive receiver.
It really does. And to make this tangible, we really have to talk about one of his most legendary projects, his water whistle pieces from the 1970s.
Oh my goodness, yes. When I read the logistics of this in the source material, it completely blew my mind.
It's so audacious.
He convinced institutions to let him install electronic sounds, specifically designed acoustic whistles inside active public swimming pools.
Let's set the scene for the listener. It's the 1970s. You walk into a humid, echoing indoor pool area wearing your swimsuit. You are expecting to hear art.
But standing on the pool deck, you hear absolutely nothing except the usual splashing and echoing voices.
Right. It was completely silent above the waterline. The acoustic waves he was generating were trapped entirely beneath the surface.
So to actually hear the art you came to experience, you had to physically get into the pool, hold your breath, and submerge your ears underwater.
And because water is much denser than air, sound travels through it more than 4 times faster.
So the moment your ears slip below the surface, your skull is suddenly flooded with this rich, complex tapestry of synthesizer tones that you couldn't hear a second ago.
Talk about demanding active participation from your audience. You have to literally strip down, commit your body to a different element, and alter your breathing just to perceive the work.
It's the ultimate commitment. I kept thinking about it like the difference between watching a movie on rails, where the camera just forcefully drags you along a predetermined path, versus exploring a massive open-world video game.
That's a really great analogy.
Because Newhouse, as the creator, builds the physical parameters of the world. He chooses the pool, he manages the water temperature, he designs the frequencies, but you, the listener, have to actively decide to dive in.
You decide where to float.
Right. You decide if you want to swim closer to the deep end, where the bass frequencies might be heavier. You decide when to come up for air and break the spell. You are effectively mixing the audio track with the physical movement of your own body.
That open-world game analogy captures the interactivity perfectly. Newhouse's overarching mission was to destroy the passive reception of the traditional concert hall.
He despised the idea of audiences just sitting in the dark, letting music wash over them while their bodies remained inert.
He demanded that you use your physical body as an antenna. He wanted us to focus intensely on the physical architectural reality of the space we inhabit.
But as we analyze the evolution of this field, we hit a massive theoretical pivot.
A huge pivot. Because while Newhouse desperately wanted us to focus on the physical space and the physical mechanics of the ear, the theorist Seth Kim Cohen argues that focusing on the biology of hearing is actually a trap.
Wait, a trap.
Yeah, Kim Cohen argues we need to move beyond the physical ear entirely.
Which brings us to Seth Kim Cohen's provocative book, In the Blink of an Ear, and this incredibly dense, mind-bending concept he introduces called the non-cochlear turn.
Okay, just to ground this in anatomy for a second. The cochlea is the spiral-shaped cavity in the inner ear that actually processes physical sound waves into nerve impulses.
Right, and Kim Cohen essentially looks at the entire history of sound art and says, stop just listening to the acoustic beauty of the sound and start reading it like a text.
What's truly fascinating here is how Kim Cohen roots his complex media theory in a very simple, undeniable biological fact. He points out a physiological reality that dictates how we interact with the world. The human ear has no eyelid.
An eyelid, meaning you can close your eyes if you don't want to see something, but you can't organically close your ears.
Exactly the point. The ear is perpetually open. It is a vulnerable, always-on receiver. Because we cannot shut out the acoustic world, Kim Cohen argues that hearing is never a singular, isolated event.
It is always a messy plurality of experience. Sound is constantly bleeding into other sounds, layering over other contexts, and carrying societal baggage.
And because sound is so inherently messy and contextual, Kim Cohen wants to adapt a massive philosophical revolution that happened in visual art and forcefully apply it to the world of sound.
And to do that, He looks backward to the early 20th century, specifically to the legendary provocateur Marcel Duchamp.
Yes, we absolutely have to understand Duchamp to understand Kim Cohen.
So back in the 1910s, Duchamp became deeply disillusioned with what he famously derided as retinal art.
Retinal art being any visual art that was created simply to look pleasing to the human retina.
Think of a beautifully painted landscape, a perfectly shaded bowl of fruit, or a flattering portrait. Duchamp argued that art had become lazy. It was only appealing to the eye rather than challenging the mind.
So in 1917, Duchamp submitted a standard porcelain urinal laid on its back and signed with a fake name, R. Mutt, to an art exhibition, calling it Fountain.
He was basically declaring the physical object doesn't matter. The visual beauty doesn't matter. The idea behind placing this object in a gallery is the actual art.
He birthed conceptual art, and Kim Cohen is demanding this exact same Duchampian revolution, but for sound. He wants sound art to reject sound in itself.
Okay, let's define sound in itself. This would be the auditory equivalent of the beautiful bowl of fruit.
Right. Precisely. It's an artist generating cool, trippy synthesizer noises or recording a pure, resonant bell chime and asking the audience to appreciate it simply because it possesses a beautiful acoustic resonance.
Kim Cohen argues that getting lost in the acoustic beauty of a reverberating tone is just as lazy as staring at a pretty landscape painting.
He advocates for a shift towards sound out of itself.
Meaning what, exactly?
This means using sound as a text to be deciphered, as a marker of context, and as a stark reflection of social reality. He calls this non-cochlear sonic art.
The premise is that you don't just process the artwork with your cochlea, you process it with your intellect.
Yes. You have to understand the political, economic, or historical baggage that a specific sound inherently carries.
To map out how this actually works, Kim Cohen adapts a famous diagram from the art critic Rosalind Krauss, her expanded field grid. He takes her visual framework and builds a sonic expanded field.
And he sets up two main opposing poles to categorize all audio, speech versus noise.
Let's break down those poles, because they aren't literal speech and literal noise, right?
No, not at all. In Kim Cohen's framework, speech represents built sound. It is intentional sound. It is sound imbued with linguistic structure and deliberate communication. Think of it as the architecture of audio.
And on the opposite end of the spectrum, noise represents non-intentional sound. It's the ambient landscape, the chaotic rumble of a city street, the raw, unfiltered environment.
Correct. Now, where the theory gets complex is how Kim Cohen defines the theoretical spaces between these poles.
Like where music fits in.
Right. For instance, he defines music in this grid as the collision of not speech and not noise.
Music is an abstract, highly privileged, formalized structure. It isn't trying to communicate literal linguistic meaning like speech.
But it is far too organized and composed to be considered random noise.
But the holy grail for Kim Cohen, the ultimate goal of this framework, is non-cochlear art. This exists at the collision of the positive categories. It is noise plus speech.
It is environmental noise that functions linguistically. It is a raw soundscape that must be read and decoded by the brain just as much as it is heard by the ear.
To move this out of abstract theory and see what noise plus speech actually looks like, we have to examine the specific comparison Kim Cohen uses in the text.
He contrasts two very different field recordings to prove his point.
On one hand, you have Bill Fontana's recording titled Kirribilli Wharf.
Fontana took high-quality microphones and placed them under a pier in Australia to capture the ambient sounds of the environment.
You hear the rhythmic splashing of the waves, the deep, hollow creaking of the wooden pylons, the wind whistling through the gaps. It's a stunning, immersive acoustic capture of nature's timeless cycles.
It is the definition of sound in itself.
It sounds incredibly relaxing.
Yeah.
But Kim Cohen is basically looking at that beautiful recording and saying, that is retinal art. That is just a pretty audio landscape. It doesn't challenge the mind.
That is his exact critique. Now, he asks us to contrast Fontana's Pier with a piece by the French composer Luc Ferrari titled Presque Rien No. 1, which translates to Almost Nothing No. 1.
Ferrari went to a small working-class fishing village in Yugoslavia.
He set up microphones in his window and recorded the ambient noise of the village waking up at dawn. Through meticulous tape splicing, he condensed hours of morning activity into a shorter track.
You hear the very first fisherman passing by on his bicycle, the gears clicking in the cold air, you hear dogs barking, and crucially, you hear the heavy diesel engine of the 6 a.m. lorry driving to the port to pick up the laborers.
Okay, so why does Kim Cohen elevate the sound of a diesel truck over the sound of an ocean wave? Both are just recordings of the environment.
Because Ferrari's recording documents a social reality. The sound of that lorry isn't just an interesting acoustic rumble.
In Kim Cohen's framework, that lorry represents the working class. It represents the economic structure of the Yugoslavian village, the daily grind of human civilization, the mechanization of labor.
It is environmental noise that functions as speech. It tells a distinct socio-political story about human society.
Kim Cohen argues that non-cochlear art forces us to grapple with these heavy, real-world social meanings rather than just zoning out to the soothing, politically neutral sounds of water hitting wood.
I have to interject here, though, because I feel a massive wave of pushback rising up in me when reading Kim Cohen on this specific point.
Oh, really? Why is that?
I understand the intellectual rigor, but does this theory mean we are no longer allowed to just enjoy a sound for being beautiful? Does every single creak of a floorboard and groan of an engine in a soundscape have to be deciphered as a heavy socio-political statement?
That is a very fair question.
Like if I take a walk in the woods and listen to the wind in the pines, I'm not thinking about the global timber economy. I'm just finding peace. Why does Kim Cohen want to intellectualize the joy out of listening?
Your frustration is entirely valid, and it points to the most common critique of the non-cochlear turn. It is a fiercely intellectualized, almost relentlessly rigid way to approach sensory input. He is essentially demanding that you never turn your brain off, that you never allow yourself the luxury of pure aesthetic pleasure.
But Kim Cohen would counter your frustration by arguing that your desire to just find peace in the woods is actually a position of immense social privilege.
Interesting.
He would argue that sound never exists in a neutral vacuum. Every sound is attached to the economic, political, or social system that produced it.
So by ignoring it, I'm making a choice.
Exactly. To ignore that system, to just listen to the wind while ignoring the highway humming 2 miles away, is an editorial choice. It's choosing to only see half the picture.
Well, it is an exhaustingly intense way to navigate the world. You are constantly decoding the matrix around you.
It definitely asks a lot of the listener.
But interestingly, while Kim Cohen wants us to be these hyper-intellectual decoders of social context, another theorist in our stack aggressively pulls us in the exact opposite direction.
Yes, Salome Vogelin. She wants to rip us out of our intellectual brains and drag us right back down into the meat, bones, and fluids of our own bodies. She wants us to confront the raw, physical vulnerability of the act of listening.
Salome Voitelin's landmark book, Listening to Noise and Silence, shifts the focus entirely toward the phenomenology of listening.
So instead of asking what a sound means politically,
Phenomenology asks what it actually feels like to experience that sound within your subjective, messy human consciousness. And to do this, Vogelin draws a very sharp, very profound contrast between the psychology of seeing and the psychology of hearing.
she returns to this concept of distance that we talked about at the beginning. She argues that visual art inherently grants the viewer what she calls a meta-position.
Which is a position of safe, intellectual distance from the object, because you can step back, cross your arms, and look at a painting in its entirety. Seeing implies structural certainty.
You can see where the canvas begins and where the frame ends. You feel like you understand the boundaries of the thing, which gives you a sense of mastery over it.
Visual distance nourishes the ego. It reinforces the idea that we are objective observers who can label things, categorize them, and keep them separate from ourselves.
But hearing shatters that illusion of mastery. Hearing, Vogelin says, is characterized by phenomenological doubt.
Phenomenological doubt, it's such a strange, evocative phrase. It implies that we can never truly trust what we are hearing.
Think about the instability of sound, especially an acousmatic sound.
Remind me, acousmatic means.
It's a sound where the visual source is hidden. Exactly what Max Neuhaus was doing with his installations. When you hear an invisible sound echoing down a hallway, you don't have that visual structural certainty. You can't point to its borders.
The sound is ephemeral, it's bouncing off the walls, it is bending around corners. You cannot step back from it to observe it objectively.
As Vogelin profoundly writes, you cannot hear a source unless you are already immersed in its auditory object. The listener is simultaneously entwined with the herd.
You can't stand outside the art. You are inside the art, and the art is inside your skull.
Precisely the dynamic she is describing. And she uses this incredibly visceral, almost uncomfortable phrase to describe this state of acoustic immersion. Being honeyed.
Being honeyed. It sounds suffocating and sweet at the same time.
It perfectly captures the physical reality of sound waves. Listening is an intersubjective, sticky engagement. When you are surrounded by a low-frequency bass drone in a gallery, you're stuck in it, like an insect trapped in honey. It coats you.
You aren't just observing the world from a safe distance. Through the vulnerable act of listening, you are actively participating in the creation of the moment. You are inventing the world rather than just recording it.
To really ground this abstract philosophy, the text brings in a historical parallel. Maurice Merleau-Ponty's 1948 radio lectures, specifically his analysis of the post-impressionist painter Paul Cézanne.
Merleau-Ponty noted that Cézanne didn't paint to just objectively document a mountain from a detached perspective, like a camera taking a photograph.
Cézanne painted to rediscover the world through his own bodily experience. He wanted to capture the doubt, the shifting light, the struggle of human perception on the canvas.
And Vogelin takes this analysis of Cézanne and applies it directly to sound. Listening isn't just your ear receiving data. The bodily engagement, the physical vibration of your eardrum is the experience.
And this leads us to what is arguably the most brilliant, memorable analogy in Vogelin's entire text. She wants to explain the difference between the intellectual distance of looking and the bodily immersion of listening. So she compares it to a lemon.
The lemon analogy is incredible.
Let's walk through it. Imagine a bright yellow lemon sitting on a kitchen table. If you just stand back and look at the skin of that lemon, you maintain your intellectual distance.
You can analyze it calmly. You can say to yourself, ah, yes, a lemon. It is yellow. It is oval. It is a citrus fruit. You have categorized it. You are safe. Your body remains neutral.
But the moment you pick up that lemon and bite deeply into the sour flesh,
the illusion of distance vanishes. Your body violently and involuntarily reacts. Your mouth instantly puckers. Your salivary glands flood. Your eyes might even water.
You experience a physical, sensorial shock. You can no longer objectively analyze the lemon because you are entwined with the lemon. You are honeyed by its acidity.
Listening is biting the lemon.
Listening is biting the lemon. It is the perfect distillation of her theory. Visual art in a museum, sitting quietly behind glass, lends a false authenticity and readability to an object. But the act of listening happens in the fleeting, uncontrollable, acidic now.
You can't pause a sound wave. You can't step back from it.
And exploring how this uncontrollable now is transmitted leads to a fascinating tangent in the source material regarding experimental radio, because radio removes the visual entirely.
Think about the physical experience of driving alone on a dark highway at 2 a.m. listening to a strange talk radio station. You can't see the host.
Vogelin describes this specific environment as the darkness of radio as a cave. Without any visual input to anchor you, the durational flow of the sound becomes exaggerated. Your brain starts filling in the blanks.
The text mentions Susan Stone's Languitude, which is an experimental radio piece that heavily manipulates voice, breath, and language.
When you sit in that metaphorical cave of the radio and listen to a disembodied voice whispering or stuttering, it forcefully incites your imagination. Because you lack the visual metaposition, the sound creates its own enveloping reality. You are biting the lemon in the dark.
But there is a beautiful, almost melancholic paradox to radio that the text highlights.
Oh, right. When a signal is broadcast out over the airwaves from a transmission tower, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people might be listening to that exact same frequency at the exact same millisecond.
But they are entirely isolated from one another. They are alone in their cars, alone in their dark kitchens, or isolated under headphones.
Radio creates a massive collective of individuals listening all together alone.
It creates a synchronized sonic reality across a massive geographic space, yet it is populated entirely by alienated individual subjects.
It's incredibly poignant. And honestly, when I was reading about this idea of individual, isolated paths running simultaneously through a massive collective network, I immediately thought of the internet.
We are all logged into the exact same global database, but we're all clicking totally different links, scrolling different feeds, completely alone in our rooms.
And that technological parallel perfectly mirrors how our next theoretical source connects the physical phenomenology of sound art to the digital architecture of the 21st century.
This brings us to Lev Manovich and his highly influential book, The Language of New Media.
At first glance, a book about computer software seems out of place in a discussion about acoustic installations. We have to ask, how does the spatial navigation of sound art overlap with the digital revolution?
Because chronologically, the rise of spatial sound installation in the 1970s and 80s runs exactly parallel to the development of modern computing and the graphical user interface.
Manovich lays out several fundamental principles that define new media things like numerical representation, automation, and transcoding. But the two principles that act as the skeleton key for understanding sound art are modularity and variability.
Let's clearly define those terms in Manovich's digital context first. Modularity is the principle that new media is built from independent, discrete parts.
Think of pixels, individual sound files, or blocks of HTML code.
These separate modules can be assembled into larger, complex objects, like a website, without ever losing their independence. If you look at a Wikipedia page, the text is one module, the image in the corner is another, the hyperlink is another. They are pulled together on the fly by the browser.
And variability is the natural byproduct of modularity. Because the object is built out of independent modules rather than permanently glued together, a new media object is not fixed.
It can exist in infinite, customizable, potentially different versions based on how the user interacts with it.
Exactly the distinction he draws. Manovich contrasts this new digital reality with the rigid structure of industrial society. Think of the classic Hollywood movie reel or a Henry Ford automotive assembly line.
Industrialization was obsessed with standardization. Every single person sitting in a movie theater in 1950 saw the exact same linear sequential narrative, frame by frame, in the exact same order.
But post-industrial new media like the internet is defined by variability. It's driven by user customization, hypermedia, and branching paths. You choose the narrative.
Okay, so we have the digital theory, but how does this digital concept of modularity apply to a physical room full of hidden speakers playing electronic hums? How is Max Neuhaus making new media out of water and sound waves?
This is where we synthesize Manovich's software theory with Neuhaus's spatial architecture and Voegelin's phenomenology. If you think about it structurally, a spatial sound art installation is the exact physical equivalent of a digital database.
That is a massive conceptual leap. Let's walk through the mechanics of that.
In traditional symphonic music, like the Beethoven example we used earlier, the composer provides a strict linear narrative. The sheet music is the industrial assembly line.
But in an installed sound environment, the artist refuses to provide a linear narrative. Instead, they provide a modular database of acoustic elements and scatter them throughout a physical space.
So if I walk into an installation, the low vibrating bass hum coming from the floorboards in the left corner is one independent piece of data. And the high-pitched metallic whistle bouncing off the ceiling near the exit is another discrete piece of data.
Correct. The artwork exists purely as a spatial database. So if the artist isn't forcing a narrative, who creates the story?
The listener does. The listener acts as the algorithm. As you physically walk through the room, moving closer to the bass hum, turning your back on the whistle, lingering at a specific acoustic sweet spot where the two sounds phase into each other, you are generating your own unique temporal narrative from the spatial database.
You are creating a customized, variable version of the artwork simply through the choreography of your own body.
It's literally physical hyperlinking. When you are browsing Wikipedia and you click a blue hyperlink, you are connecting independent modules of data to build your own customized learning path.
When you walk through an immersive, multi-channel sound installation, you are creating invisible, physical links between different audio zones with your footsteps.
It relies on the exact same logic, just applied to physical architecture instead of a glowing screen. Manovich makes a brilliant historical comparison to highlight this nonlinear approach. He looks at Dziga Vertov's 1929 avant-garde Russian film, Man with a Movie Camera.
Oh, that's the famous silent film with the chaotic double exposures, fast cuts, and the cameraman climbing all over moving trains and city buildings. It has no plot, no actors, no intertitles.
Yes. Manovich categorizes Vertov's film as a database of city life. Vertov completely abandoned the linear narrative of traditional cinema. Instead, he presented a modular catalog of camera techniques and urban images.
He was treating the physical city of Kiev as a database to be navigated and sorted, rather than a stage for a story. Sound artists working in spatial installations are doing the exact same thing. They are treating acoustic space as an interactive database.
It is genuinely staggering, almost chilling, to realize that artists like Max Neuhaus, or even John Cage working in the 1950s, were essentially creating interactive software for human ears decades before the graphical user interface even existed on a computer screen.
They intuited the logic of the database, they understood that the future of human experience was going to be nonlinear and user-driven, and they applied that logic to raw, analog sound.
But for all this heavy theory about sound, about Kim Cohen's social data, about the digital algorithms of our own movement, we are missing one crucial element.
What's that?
If a painter's canvas is the blank woven cloth, What is the underlying canvas for sound art? Where does the database actually live?
Ah, the canvas for all sound is silence.
We have to talk about silence, because Salme Vogelin returns to this concept, and her phenomenological breakdown of silence completely flips our normal, everyday understanding of it upside down.
Most of us, moving through our noisy lives, think of silence purely as an absence. It's a void. It's the empty space left behind when you turn the car engine off or when the music stops playing.
We treat silence like a blank sheet of paper, but Vogelin vehemently argues against this. Silence is not the absence of sound, and it is not just the empty space left behind by sound. Silence, she suggests, is the basic chowder within which we meet any sound.
The basic chowder. It is such a thick, wonderfully weird metaphor. It implies substance. It means silence isn't an empty vacuum. It's a fluid, a medium that physically holds everything else.
It is the foundational condition of our auditory reality. To truly understand silence as a substance rather than a void, we have to look closely at the most famous, the most polarizing, and arguably the most misunderstood piece of sound art ever created.
You're talking about John Cage's 4'3'3".
Yes. 4 minutes and 33 seconds of it. Essentially nothing. Let's describe the premiere because the context is everything.
It's 1952 in an open-air concert hall in Woodstock, New York. The pianist, David Tudor, walks out onto the stage. He sits at the piano.
He opens the keyboard lid to signal the start of the first movement, and then he just sits there. He doesn't press a single key.
After a while, he closes the lid to signal the end of the movement. He does this 3 times, totaling exactly 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And then he leaves the stage.
And the audience, expecting a traditional recital, was absolutely furious. But Tudor wasn't playing nothing. The brilliance of Cage's piece is that the structure of the concert hall, the stage, the seated audience, the stopwatch, framed the silence and made it audible.
When the pianist refuses to play the expected notes, what do your ears do? They search the room. During that premiere in Woodstock, the audience began to hear the wind rushing through the trees outside the hall.
In the second movement, raindrops began pattering on the roof. In the third movement, they heard the sounds of their own agitation, like people muttering, chairs creaking, bodies shifting uncomfortably.
By withholding the intentional speech of the piano, Cage forced the audience to listen to the noise of the environment. Coming out of the heavy, constant bombardment of noise in our daily lives, Cage forces the formless listener into this highly structured silence.
And in that silence, as Vogelin points out, something profound happens. The listener suddenly becomes audible to themselves. In the basic chatter of silence, you realize that you are a physical organism making noise just by breathing, just by existing.
If we pull all of these theoretical threads together, Cage's silence, Newhouse's spatial pools, Kim Cohen's social context, and Manovich's interactive databases, we arrive at the ultimate takeaway of the entire sound art movement.
It is.
By forcing us into this physical, spatial awareness, sound art establishes what we can call a sonic sociality.
Sonic sociality. Explain how that shifts our relationship with each other.
Think back to the museum we discussed at the very beginning. In traditional visual art, the primary relationship is a closed loop between the solitary viewer and the inanimate object. It is a private, isolated experience.
But the genre of sound art, because it relies on the physical transmission of waves through a shared environment, is defined by the contingent, honeyed relationship between the subjects.
Meaning the listeners themselves who are encountering the artwork together.
Because sound isn't contained within a gilded wooden frame, it literally bleeds into the bodies of everyone in the room. If I am standing in a sound installation with you, my body is absorbing the exact same acoustic waves as your body. We're entwined in the same honey.
We are navigating the exact same physical database. I hear the sound of the art, but I also hear the sound of your footsteps moving through the art.
You cannot separate the art from the people experiencing it. The theorist Douglas Kahn discusses this phenomenon in terms of panaurality, which points to the universalism and the inescapable shared nature of all sound.
Sound is inherently communal. The avant-garde artists who pioneered this field in the mid-century moved so fluidly between performance, sculpture, and objecthood because they were desperately trying to capture this shared acoustic reality.
They wanted to violently break down the solitary, isolated ego of the visual art viewer and force them to acknowledge their presence within a collective space.
When you put on a pair of heavy, noise-canceling headphones on a crowded subway, you are intentionally isolating yourself. You are building a sonic wall to pretend that the other people on the train don't exist. You are retreating into your own private gallery.
But true sound art does the exact opposite. It destroys walls. It refuses to let you hide. It demands that you recognize the breathing, shifting, noisy, messy bodies of everyone sharing that acoustic space with you.
It forces you to acknowledge that whether we like it or not, we are all vibrating together in the exact same basic chowder.
It is a profoundly democratic, physically unifying medium. It forces us out of our comfortable meta position of visual distance and plunges us headfirst into the acidic, phenomenological doubt of shared reality. It demands that we stop just looking at the world and start actually inhabiting it.
What an incredible intellectual journey. We started with Alan Lick's struggle to even find a suitable name for this rebellious, unclassifiable medium that refused to be put in a box.
We navigated Max Neuhaus's underwater swimming pools, realizing how shifting our focus from musical time to physical space forces us to use our bodies as antennas.
We wrestled with Seth Kim Cohen's non-cochlear challenge, debating whether we must read the heavy social and political realities embedded in the noise of a 6 a.m. diesel lorry.
We felt the visceral shock of biting into Salme Vogelin's sour lemon of phenomenological vulnerability, getting trapped in the honey of sound. We mapped Lev Manovich's theories of digital databases onto the physical act of walking through an echoing room.
And finally, we sat in the uncomfortable tension of John Cage's silence to realize that sound art isn't just about listening to a piece of art, it's about finally hearing each other.
Ultimately, it is a practice of recognizing our shared physical presence in a world that is constantly trying to isolate us.
It really is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the sonic expanded field, I want to leave you with one final lingering question to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
If the theorists are right, if listening is truly an active act of inventing the world, rather than just passively receiving it, then the next time you walk down a busy, chaotic city street, what are you actually doing?
Are you just a passive body walking through a neutral landscape?
Yeah.
Or are you actively composing the symphony of your own reality? Every footstep you take on the pavement, every distant police siren, every fragmented snippet of a stranger's conversation you pass. These are all modular pieces of a massive urban database.
You are the algorithm. You are the artist of your own non-cochlear existence, remixing the city with every step you take.
How will you listen differently tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. Keep your ears open.